In this lesson, we'll continue our investigation into the ways in which language can influence perception and thought. In part one, we'll just lay out the standard view of words and concepts, and then in part two, we'll look at some data that suggests that the activation of words and concepts does influence perceptual processing in the brain. Okay, so first, the example we'll use here, as diagrammed here, we're going to use the example of the concept chair. Now, chair is usually defined by its functionality, so it's an object that we sit on. And in our diagram here, we have the sound of the word chair over here, and that has been linked to what we're calling the concept of chair, which is associated here with visual memories of three objects that the brain has previously seen. We'll call them exemplars of the concept. So how do we acquire the concept of a chair? Well, when our brain is young, we encounter these objects, and somebody in our environment, a teacher or a parent or something, utters this sound while in the presence of these objects, and so our brains are real good at making these associations. So the sound chair is going to be linked up with visual representations of those objects. Right, so if I possess the concept of a chair, then when I just hear the word chair, I can reactivate what the chair looks like in my mind. I can make a visual image of it. And if I see a chair, I can access the sound of the word chair for communication purposes. Right, so this is all we've seen this before. But now let's consider something new about this idea. I mean, after all, if I see these three objects and somebody is uttering the same sound, right, chair, it invites the brain then to represent that these things are all members of a category, right? They must share something that makes them members of the same category. And so if they're all going to be labeled as chairs by my teacher or my parent, it suggests that they're in category with boundaries or necessary features. So the brain is not only going to make individual visual memories of these chairs that I've seen, but it's going to in a sense make a representation of the things they have in common that satisfy the function of sitting, right? And that's going to be a key element of our concept of a chair. It's not that the concept of chair is just a million different chairs we've seen. It's the brain is going to make a representation of those common features that satisfy the function of sitting. And that's a key part of having the concept chair. So we're going to call that process of finding the common features and making a representation of that, we're going to call that an abstraction type of process. So the brain is going to do some abstraction to form the concept chair. It's going to be representing the common features across all of the exemplars that are necessary to perform the function of the chair, which was to sit on it, right? Now, what are those necessary features of a chair? Well, things like you got to have a horizontal surface, right, to put your butt on. It's got to be elevated from the ground so your legs can go somewhere. It has a back. If it doesn't have a back, right, it would be more like a stool or something, right? And that's a different concept. And, you know, maybe there's some requirement that it's reasonably comfortable. If there were nails sticking up here on the seat here, lots of folks maybe wouldn't call that a chair. That's a torture device or something. So whatever it is that provides the category boundaries, there are a set of features that allows all these three to be lumped into the same category. And that is a key part of the concept chair. Now, let's take a look at what historically what we're just going to call the standard view of words. And again, here's our brain, left side, and our little picture of the concept, and we have our visual memories of some of the exemplars down here, and we've got our word over here, chair. Now, in the standard view, words are just labels for the concept. Okay, so after all, a word is just a sound, and our brain would store memories of these different sounds. But the idea is that the word chair is simply just connected or associated with the concept. And a key part of this is that knowing a word does not affect the conceptual representation. See, the conceptual representation was formed by exposure to all these exemplars, and then the brain was abstracting those common features and representing those common features that satisfy the requirement of sitting, and that is our conceptual representation. And chair, the word chair, is simply a convenient reporting device. So when we know the word, we can say it really easily and communicate. And then the person who hears that word, if they also have the concept, they can reactivate their own concept chair, and we can have effective communication. But if we didn't know the word chair, so for example, suppose we encountered these three objects, right? But nobody was categorizing, nobody was labeling them all as chairs. We didn't know the word for this. Well, our brain still made memories of these objects, and we might be able to form a concept, right? Because we might be able to see that they were performing some kind of function, a similar function. People were sitting on all these things. So we could form the concept without knowing the word for it. And in fact, we could still communicate that concept. It would just be more laborious, right? So we would have to give a bunch of descriptions or definitions of these things. So we'd have to say, oh yeah, well, it's this thing with a horizontal surface, and you put your butt on it, and it's elevated, and it's got a back. So we could communicate about chairs, about the concept of a chair, even if we didn't have the word. So on the standard view, words are just really convenient reporting devices so that we can quickly share conceptual knowledge. And then the person we're talking to, they can reactivate that conceptual knowledge so we can achieve successful communication. But in part 2, we're going to look at some research that suggests that activating a word or hearing a word is going to be activating a concept in a very special way, in a way different from how it might be activated in any other way. So the argument will be, in part 2, that words are changing the ways concepts are activated, and since then concepts are going to be influencing some perceptual systems, changing the way we might be perceiving and thinking about the world. So again, the standard view is this idea that words are really just sort of labels, and they don't themselves really influence the concept. And the alternate view in part 2 will be that, in fact, activation of the word changes the way the concept is activated, which will change perceptual processing.